All right, welcome everyone to episode 3 of DeSci Peaks. This is what?
Yeah.
This is the March episode on April 14th.
Listen, complications in life, you gotta adapt. You gotta, move forward. So yes, we're having our March episode in April, and we'll have our April episode in about a week and a half, and it'll be all good.
Yeah, how's Canada? Is it recovering?
Listen, yeah, it's fine. It wasn't all of Canada. It was just certain East Coast of Canada that got whaled with this storm, Montreal in particular. So, looking out my window Wednesday, everything was frozen over. It was like, that movie, not War of the Worlds, but it's like that apocalypse movie, like a wave hits New York and then everything freezes over.
Yeah, shit, that happened. That's a good one.
Right, exactly. That was really good. So same thing. I was looking out my window and it was raining, and then just like a sheet of ice was forming, and then I lost power for like days. But the funny thing is that happened on Wednesday. Yeah, that happened on Wednesday. Thursday, it was beautiful, clear skies. All the ice had melted, but it looked like a bomb went off. Trees were all over the place. Really? Anyways, it was an interesting contrast.
Well, here we are, and Paige just joined in the back studio. So, yeah, Paige, we'll bring you up in just a second here. But yeah, today we are going to be joined by Paige Donner, Bruno Gold. No. Gordon Gold and Bruno. I don't know Bruno's last name.
Chikeka Bruno.
Okay. Cool. And we're going to be talking about ReSci, and I look forward to it because I have no idea what ReSci is. So I'm going to have some real questions. Great. And Bruno just jumped in from climecheck too. But as always, first 30 minutes, we're talking about the news from March, DeSci related, of course. So anyone is welcome to join the stream. We posted the link to the studio in the Discord. So yeah, all you got to do is jump in the Discord. There's a link there in the general channel, and you can come and get it live on stream with us. Otherwise, we'll just jab on about the news. So I'll bring up Paige and Bruno here. I think Gordon's going to be joining us a little later. Cool. Hey, guys.
Hi, Paige. Hey, Bruno.
Hey, hi, everybody.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
On. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, good to be here.
It's going to be a good show. So, I'm glad. Wait, is there, John, is there something weird with my connection? Am I coming through okay?
No, you're golden.
All right, good. Just make sure. Last time I had connection issues.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk about let's talk about the news. Because we have our special guests here for us, I'll let them chime in. Is there anything particular to the month of March, or is there anything that you guys want to shout out relative to DeSci in terms of the month of March that happened within your organizations or anything? Either.
Well, if Bruno, are you going to jump in? I wasn't sure.
Oh no, you could go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess there was Paris Blockchain Week, and so not to complain, but I did approach the organizers very early on, even as early as January during Davos, trying to coordinate something, to do something DeSci, and I didn't get much positive response. and then at the end of the day, I mean, they were very, they expressed a lot of interest, but not a lot of, hey, let's do something. At the end of the day, one of their representatives proposed, I had said, well, I'll do a side event. And because you know how there's all kinds of side events at these gatherings, and then they proposed me a gorgeous conference hall or meeting hall on the Place Place Vendôme, which is like in the center of Paris, where all the very expensive jewelry stores are, and it was only $125,000 for the 4-hour evening. I'm not that DAO yet. That's not FrontierDAO yet. So, but I ended up, because of the chat, how this ecosystem is very communicative, which is a great aspect out of it. So in one of the Telegram chats, I ended up kind of bumping into the chairman, and I said, hey, 125,000 is pretty steep. We're just a little DAO. We're not Circle. We're not BlockFi. And he said, oh my word. Okay, so then but still, they didn't. Maybe they'll consider it for next year. But I do find it a little sad that something officially DeSci wasn't incorporated into the lineup.
Yeah, I have commentaries on that.
I think it speaks to the youth of the movement. We're going to be talking about some positive stuff that came out in March regarding the growth of the movement, but there's still a long way to go. So it's a great it's a great start, right? So next year is still another opportunity.
It'll be easier next year because they'll be like, oh, you're back, and the space will have grown over the next coming year. That is the goal. So, Bruno, is there anything you want to shout out in terms of climecheck, or even anything DeSci that you're aware of that happened in the month of March? Do you want to shout out?
Oh, okay. In terms of the general ecosystem, I don't think I sort of like remember anything of note that happened within my circle or I saw in the month of March. But for climecheck, we're basically testing out our sensor to the blockchain integration, because we're basically trying to roll out a couple of air pollution sensors and build a community around that. So the month of March, we decided to test our sensor to blockchain integration. It was pretty good. So I think that's what we did for the month of March. Just built, tested, integrated.
Everybody's heads down building.
Yeah.
It's that time. This is what I mean. Next year is going to be crazy because we'll have actual products up and running, or not products, but tooling up and running that can help leverage the implementation of the ethos of what we're trying to do.
Well, speaking of Gleb's open source, the node software. So there's also like getting more projects out there and as like on-roads for on-ramps for folks to jump into the ecosystem and contribute however they can, even if they don't like sign up for a project. It's like, oh my God, I can go contribute to this repo somewhere and get a feel for what the community's like that way. So it's really cool. I think there's a lot of stuff happening like that.
So this is a perfect example on what we struggle with, right? John just nodes is up and running in open source. What's the nodes? What are DeSci nodes? Let's kind of put it into context for the people who don't really know what that is.
Yeah. So DeSci nodes are, I also want to hear about climecheck, by the way, because I've never heard about this project. DeSci nodes is essentially, it's a very large project. So very briefly put, is the idea that research is more than just a PDF. There's a lot of different assets involved in research. You can think of code and data as the easy ones. And a research node is all those assets aggregated together and stored on sort of an open state repository or a blockchain, where you can do a lot of cool stuff once you have research stored like that without a middleman doing the storing. You can make new metrics. You don't need impact factor or H indexes. You don't need publishers to do their current business model. They can change their business model. There's a lot of opportunities once you have an open index of all the knowledge we create. So now it's open source and you can go play with it and build on it and fork it and do your own thing. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I highly recommend people to go check out the demo. It gives you a good understanding of what you can do and how you can leverage DeSci nodes in terms of publications and other aspects, right? Think about the way I like to frame it, because this is personally one of my favorite toys coming out of the DeSci space. But as a researcher, as a neuroimmunologist, writing a paper, publishing a PDF, and then not being able to iterate on it as it grows, as your project, progresses. Sometimes there are things that there's an experiment that you did, like, oh, that would fit perfectly in that publication. Now you have to wait to accumulate a body to then republish it if you can still, right? Or, for example, I go speak at a conference talking about the research, and there's just these ideas that pop out that would be great for framing that research topic, that research article. Well, now with DeSci nodes, you can inject all of these different pieces of metadata into that publication and let it live on chain to a certain extent. And so you have provenance, you have contextualization that you can add to it. So it becomes a more comprehensive unit of knowledge that can be leveraged when telling your story. And as a matter of fact, science now becomes an art piece, because you can add in all these layers to the actual data that help people understand it. And I think this is crucially important when it comes to bringing science back down, or removing the abstraction that has occurred between, you know, non-scientists and the scientific paradigm, right? Now anybody can come to, or people who are interested can hopefully come to your article or your publication and have a better understanding of what it is. And that just brings science closer to the forefront of people's minds. And I think that's extremely important, fundamentally, right, for all aspects of science. We're going to talk about ReSci, conservation, sustainability, utility, and all these kind of things. And I think that is a beautiful endpoint to what this kind of technology can allow for, and help flourish. So that's been extremely exciting to me. And now that people can play with it, it's no longer me just telling them this and them taking my word for it. They can go play with it and figure it out themselves, and hopefully try to break it, so that they can, you know, be anti-fragile.
Yes, please break it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's very cool. Definitely check that out. Another thing that's gone on is, you know, and another thing that speaks to Paige's encounter, that hopefully will be different next year, is that we're starting to guard the space. The DeSci space is starting to garner a lot more professional attention. So we had the Binance report and the Masari report, and then a few reports after that came out. I will leave my commentary to the end about these. Does anybody have any particular perspectives on how you view that? What is the impact of that on the space, and whatever two insights you'd like to add to that? Paige, go ahead, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, the Masari report I felt was fairly comprehensive. You know, it's funny because somebody contacted me on Telegram to talk about one of our projects, and then I did a 30-minute call with him, and then at the end he said, "So what do you know about Masari?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I know it's a research firm, but," and I was like, "But why? You tell me." And he goes, "Oh, well, I do some research for them." So his name wasn't in the report, but I'm wondering now. After the fact, after the report came out, I was wondering if was there some kind of a sleuth type of a thing going on there? The Binance report left us out altogether. So I was just a little surprised, honestly, because we're one of the first science focused DAOs to be formed, and the first to be co-founded by a woman. So I felt that was a little bit of a slothful job on their part. But then I think the next day they got hit by an SEC. They got sued or something. So maybe they were in the throes of some kind of stressful situation. Who knows, right? But you know, regardless of how it personally shines on FrontierDAO, I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled that this space is getting recognition, that people are looking at it, and you know, at the same time, I think there is a little bit of a recognition for in the normie world of, you know, oh, don't say blockchain. Another lady who's quite active in the world of science, I had a meeting with the other day. She said, she started the meeting and she said, blockchain has such a terrible reputation. Can you tell me why you'd be doing science in the blockchain? And so, you know, we had a very good conversation, but that's how it started. So, you know, it's important for us to recognize all perspectives. But you know, usually the more something is written about in the press, the more people give it credibility. At least there was a time when that was the case. I'm not sure how it is anymore.
Yeah, I think DeSci has this, my hope, and obviously we're all biased because we're all participants within this space, but I really, really think that DeSci, ReFi, these endpoints of blockchain, these actual applications of blockchain are what are going to hopefully change that negative narrative, the scam narrative, the blockchain is just for whatever narrative, and kind of open up the idea that no, this is just a tech, this is just a tool. A blockchain is literally just a tool that can be applied to a variety of different things. It's not pigeonholed to monetary policy and tokens and coins. And John and I have had very interesting back and forth on that in the past. So there's a lot of cool things here. Bruno, do you want to chime in on the Masari reports, Binance reports? I think they know. I think they climecheck in one of them.
I wasn't sure. I don't think climecheck appeared in any of them. I just did a brief scan through both of the reports. Like generally for the industry, I think it's a positive step in the right direction. So there's some media coverage. There's some things being written about the DeSci space. But personally, I really don't care much about reports, especially from centralized agencies like Binance, Masiri, or whoever. Like, no shot at them, but for me, like this has an opportunity to actually get things done in a way that is meaningful and impacts the people. So, of all the sort of like the blockchain iteration so far, yeah, like say Bitcoin basically started the whole movement with decentralized payment. Like Ethereum started like the whole smart contract play, which sort of like precipitated the entire industry where some of our DAOs and our infrastructures are built upon. So I think DeSci is like the next thing that will be as impactful to the public as Bitcoin and as Ethereum will be, because like you have like a whole range of problems, and so like the problems that are being solved are not just individual specific. So it's not specific to a particular project, say FrontierDAO or ClimeCheck. Like it's a problem when solved impacts the entire human community. So all the sort of like negative narrative about blockchain and all that scammy talk, I think DeSci has a great opportunity to sort of like change that. So that's why I don't care about those media publications, because like for me, I want to be focused on what we're trying to do as ClimeCheck, because like that is more important than any coverage would get. And the problem with media coverage is going into sort of like a market that's hitting towards the uptrend is you see a lot of speculation, you see a lot of sort of like negative interest. So people don't nothing in the DeSci space or anything at all. They basically just start up a project, set up a token, and that further harms the movement. So in terms of general optics is good, but personally not necessary. Let's just keep building.
John, you want to weigh in before I weigh in?
I'm a huge fan of what you just said, Bruno. That's about it.
Yeah. So
I basically align completely.
I agree, right? I look, in a certain sense, I look forward to what DeSci is going to look like in the throes of a bull market. It doesn't affect us in the same way because we're not financially driven. Like there's speculation that can be had. There are some projects that will have tokens and that will definitely drive speculation, but like the inherent crux focus of the space and the community and the ethos is not all of that. So I'm looking to see what that clash is going to actually ultimately look like when we get an influx of people who are like, oh, when token? No token. Oh, when token? Like, no, we're trying to, measure air pollution, fusion energy, all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that will actually bleed over more to the other end and show like, there's more than just when token. So my 2 cents before we go ahead.
It's there is another side to that. Like, yes, that's awesome. No when token sort of stuff. But if tokens in crypto economics are not funding the development, something else is, and it's going to be VC. So there is the danger that this space gets VC captured and captured by other sort of funding agencies. If we don't build an on-ramp for nonprofits and government agencies to fund development, it's all going to be VC. So when people say when token, what they're really saying is, and this is me being devil's advocate, by the way, I don't fully believe it, but what they're really saying is, do I have the opportunity as just a regular person to invest in the potential of this project and movement, or is the potential profit reserved for the elite? And so there is, the space shouldn't completely push away from crypto economics, but there's no reason we should be at this stage when token sort of thing.
I actually agree with that. I think that's a good point. That's a very good point. And as it relates to VCs, so what I think is that these Binance reports kind of opens up that gate a little bit more. So, the first one of Pfizer jumping into VitaDAO, that opened up the gate to a certain extent. And we had started to have, and the reason I know this is we were talking to VCs, trying to show them the space and saying there's a lot of opportunity here to participate, to come and help different DAOs grow. Didn't really care. They saw no upside to that. Then the Pfizer thing happened with VitaDAO, and phone calls or emails started to come back like, oh, yo, by the way, that thing. And people were starting to get a little bit more interested. And, you know, these Binance reports and more participants are coming. I will say that the VCs have a more professional way of asking when token. And looking for exit liquidity, and that's normal. That's what they're for. That's what their business model is, and that's fine. And it's a give and take. But I've noticed the same level of when token in terms of determining if they're going to invest in a project. And it's weird because it's not necessarily when product, at least in the experience that I've seen so far. But these are crypto native VCs. And so they come from they come from the DeFi culture, which has no utility. But I'm hoping that maybe that'll start changing and they'll be more open to investing in it for the tech and less for the speculative.
That'll be the day. But
we're all in a hopeful space. So anyways, for me,
on a future episode, I think we should dive into VC. That would be very interesting.
Oh, like in another episode?
Yeah, I think this could be a full hour. VCs versus token funding, how this whole funding and DeSci works. That would be a fun discussion.
That's a really good point.
Before to continue my cutoff of you real quick, we got to shout out OrangeDAO because they were one of the first VC groups in the space supporting DeSci. They helped fund a couple events and whatnot. If we're talking about VCs getting wet. Big shout out to OrangeDAO for the thing. They've been continuously helping. James has been around, I think, a variety of the DeSci events that I've seen. He was in Denver shouting us out and helping us move. So definitely big shout out to them. VCs are not bad. That's not the statement. That wasn't the message going forward. It's just
So in terms of the funding and the VCs, I think a measure of responsibility sort of lies in either the founding team, the initial contributors, or the parties that started the movement, be it a DAO or be it a product. So the VC funding, it's part of the system. It's systemic. You'd always get the funds, you'd always get the WEN token, you'd always get the people that are trying to sort of come in early and maximize the upside. So why it's mostly on the founders is that those are some of the considerations, the externalities you have to sort of take into focus when starting a Web3 product. And so I think it speaks to basically how the entire ecosystem is going to mature as an industry. So basically, we will start off at this edge of tech, trying to bring decentralization into the world, and it's fun. And you know how people get when they focus on the tech, we sort of neglect the business aspect and some of the core organizational structure of it all. So the VCs and the WEN token and all that as sort of what I call them inputs to sort of help us grow on how we re-emerging systems. So if you have a compelling product, VCs will fund you. So at that point, the founders have leverage in terms of setting the structure of how you want the project or the product to go. So if you're building a DAO, how do you structure your DAO in terms of token ownership? Majority of the token, does it go to the community? How do you control all that mechanism? So that feeds into creating sort of a business, a business system or organism that is self-sustaining, so you don't get captured. So you can sort of get initial fund that feeds the product and helps you build, but you get to a point where the community can drive continuous growth of the product, and you just basically off the VC faucet before you get into 50-60% of your token being owned by the entire VC. So it basically goes into how we think about sort of public collaboration, how we think about tokenomics, how we think about lock-in vesting. So for me, I'm here for the growth, for the maturity. I want to see how DAOs in 10-15 years will work. Those that are not VC captured, then the lessons learned they will provide to build better systems, better DAO. Yeah, it's fun time. So we love the VCs. They help to some extent. Don't just get captured by them.
Right. Yeah. So we'll definitely save this. Bruno, we'll have you back for that VC focused topic. Paige, I saw you wanted to jump in
Yeah.
briefly before we get to wrap up the news, then get to the actual ReSci topic. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, actually, another thing that came to mind. It wasn't because of the Massari report, but I was able to get a meeting with Sebastian Bourget, who's the founder of Sandbox, right? And so he was roaming around, Paris blockchain, and I said my pitch to him. This is why I'm bringing it up here, because this conversation reminds me of why I think this is, maybe we ought to all consider doing this, is to have a think tank in Sandbox.
Interesting.
Have a think tank, or we jump in. We can host a community center, and so I kind of pitched that. I pitched that to him, and then he was like, "Yeah, I've heard of DeSci." So I was able to use the Massari report to kind of like go, "Yeah, and here's what the ecosystem looks like." So that was a bit helpful, and so talks are kind of a little bit they're ongoing. I mean, there's so if anybody wants, if this resonates with anybody, I know that the metaverse was changing, and I just read today that Apple is probably not going to release their XR goggles until maybe third quarter now. So I know things are really changing, but still, if anybody thinks that that could be a fun thing, let's talk more and band together and see what we can do. A community DeSci center in Sandbox.
It would be fun. It would be fun. I don't have goggles, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, so as we have a few more news articles, right? So let's go run through those relatively quickly and then get to the meat of the conversation. So a really interesting one that came up, and I was trying to get Michael on. Michael, if you watch this, I pinged you. Michael from DBDAO, DeSci New York. But DeSci New York hosted, they have, I think, bi-weekly meetups, and they had, or monthly meetups, and they had Martin Shkreli on for their DeSci New York meetup in March. And that was very interesting because we were talking about it leading up, and people were commenting about like, oh, do you want to support Martin Shkreli or not, or whatever, what his perspective on. And I think he's still in the process of launching a DeSci DAO called Drug-like. I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on that. I didn't have the opportunity to watch that filming or that episode, that meetup, because they recorded. I think it's on YouTube. They have a YouTube, so everybody please go and look at it to get some insight into it. But it's interesting to see participants in the wider pharma space and may have questionable backgrounds and whatever, have done time, repented, and come back and all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing that I imagine we're going to start seeing. We're going to start seeing a lot of interest coming into the space. You guys have any perspective?
Before we throw it off really quick, I'm going to bring Gordon up. So hello, Gordon. Welcome. We're talking about Martin Shkreli. Coming in a great. Wow, you're so robotic.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's unfortunately, like my Mac doesn't really like non-Zoom, so.
Oh my God! We might need to try
it on my phone. Yeah.
Wow, that's very back in the day of robotics. That's very good.
We're going to keep talking about Martin Shkreli. I'll bring you back up in a second.
Yeah, while AI Gordon tries to fix it. Yeah, you guys, any insight on things like that? Players in the traditional space coming in, what that means? Insight on Martin Shkreli coming in, if anything? No, quiet, nothing.
I'll.
Go ahead, John.
Bruno, you seem like you're priming up.
No, I don't have sort of like a particular perspective for Martin Shkreli and all that, but like for the general trans space coming into DeSci, like it's inevitable. Bad actors coming into DeSci, it's inevitable. So I think that is where the sort of like a think tank that Paige talked about. So basically, as a defense mechanism, is for the guys that are actually building products that are useful in DeSci, is to sort of like have a think tank and sort of do the whole amplification thing. So when you have like more positive news about the movement than we have negative news, because the negative stuffs are going to come, it's inevitable. So it's just basically building that that synergy, so that the positive things are amplified. So net, the positive balances off or supersedes the negative, and for me, like, that's a win.
Jelani, you're not speaking.
Wait, am I speaking now? Yeah, I'm speaking
Now
now.
you're speaking.
Right. So when I heard about the whole Martin Shkreli thing, I was like, eh. But then and John Gordon put there you go. I think DeSci gives the opportunity for people to redeem themselves, or at least gives them the opportunity to try. The certain level of transparency to an extent is there, and so I think I'm of the opinion of giving people fair chances. But it's a community thing, so the community will be watching. So if you want to come in here and try something new, maybe redeem yourself, that's cool, but people will be watching, so that's fine. Next point.
Well, hold on. So that
this is not the focus time.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, we're not people who can offer redemption. It's a permissionless system. Only my dog can offer redemption. If people want to come in and build something, they're more than welcome to come in and build. That's it. You build a reputation, you go. And with the think tank and stuff like that, I am getting feedback right now for some reason. So I'll stop my thought right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. The redemption is not to be given. What I mean is that the space gives the opportunity because anybody can come in and build. So you can show that you've done a change, right? It's meritocratic. So you can be the change. You can embolden, envision, demonstrate the change that you're supposing to be. So that's good. The last point, I believe, is DeSci Rio. I was hoping to have Maria or somebody from DeSci Rio on, but DeSci Rio happened in March. That was a great piece of DeSci presentation in Brazil, a part of E3O. There's a whole slew of different DeSci events happening throughout Latin America, really leading the charge. One of the areas of this planet that are really leading the charge in terms of adoption and showcasing DeSci. So huge shout out to the DeSci Rio group, Alberto, Davila, Carolina from DeSci World, Maria from DeSciers, and a slew of other participants that helped build it. Great things. Always great to see more participation and more diversity of participation and representation in the space. John, is there anything else you want to put on? Is there anything else we missed?
No, and I'm still getting feedback. I'll let you know when I fix my mic.
Sounds good. So without further ado, and since we didn't have anybody else who wanted to jump on, let's go into our next topic. The main crux of our topic being ReSci. And when I first started talking about this concept to people, even within this space, they were like, man, another Sci, DeSci, ReFi, DeFi, all these kind of things that we're going to have ReSci, DeSoft, and all this kind of stuff. Like, this nomenclature is getting crazy, but it is what it is. And until we come up with better naming schemes, this is what we have. So my understanding, and we'll I will allow you to reintroduce yourselves as the key opinion leaders on this particular topic. But my understanding, or my definition of ReSci, is it's basically the interface between decentralized science, which is focused on open sourcing science and making it more easily accessible to participants in the world, whether you be a formally trained scientist or a citizen scientist or a hobbyist, and regenerative finance, which is an infrastructure to leverage economic principles for actual impact and largely altruistic beneficial impact. So it kind of sits at that interface where how can we apply tech and funding cause? John, did you mute me?
Yeah, sorry, you're unmuted. I'm trying to figure something out. I'm hearing episode 2 play in my headphones for some reason.
Oh, maybe
I can hear background noise too of some other thing playing in the background.
This is so weird. I will be right back.
Yeah, I hear something. I don't know if it's coming from you. Anyways, so in that's my definition of ReSci. Please, guys, introduce yourselves again and talk about your perspectives on give us your definition of what ReSci is. Paige, please go ahead first. And Bruno and Gordon, just mute your microphones just in case it's coming from one of you two. Bruno, it's coming from you.
It is?
Yeah, it's coming from you. There's a background noise happening. Paige, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, we found. Well, yeah, I appreciate your lead in there. So my name's Paige Donner. I'm co-founder of FrontierDAO. So we're a science-focused DAO, but more in technology transfer. So nothing really to do with biosciences. To answer your question about ReSci, so regenerative science. Honestly, I have swayed much more towards open science. I mean, I really love, decentralized science, and I love our community, and I feel that we speak the same language when we're all together. But when I'm out communicating about, these principles of accessibility and transparency and reproducibility, and inclusivity, I often actually use more the vernacular of open science. So applying the term ReSci, regenerative science, to prepare for this, I actually read a few articles about regenerative design, which I think actually does have a correlation here, because if you're doing a product that after the end of its use, it can go back to nature and not be detrimental, but actually supportive back to nature, then that's a regenerative product. So if that's the case for regenerative design, then wouldn't that the case then be for regenerative science? So I would say that if we apply that as a use case to one of our focus areas, which is fusion energy. So we believe that our climate, we believe that the climate solution is actually fusion energy, whether it's 10 years off or, nobody knows yet. But our premise is that it is going to be the solution for energy scarcity and also our climate crisis. Now, that is regenerative science, because what we're doing now is extremely extractive, right? We're extracting fossil fuels. By extracting those fossil fuels, we're in many cases, we're harming the earth, especially when it comes to things like technologies like fracking. And then also the burning of those fossil fuels is also damaging the earth, right? That's what they're, crediting, the CO2 emissions, towards, right? So it's a very extractive and detrimental type of science, the energy systems that we have right now. Whereas fusion energy would be exactly the opposite. You get more energy out than you put in. It has very, very little CO2 emissions, has negligible radioactivity, and uses one of the things that it uses for one of the technologies in terms of a fuel source is abundant in the water that's found in our oceans. So it's deuterium, and tritium is a little bit of a trickier element, and it is also necessary, but that's a separate conversation. But so I would say that fusion energy really does qualify as a regenerative science technology, because it's clean, it's abundant, it's going to be cheap, it's non-polluting, and it will also its effects are negligible. Its detrimental effects are negligible on the earth, and its positive effects for the planet and its people are exponential, really. So I would posit that fusion energy is probably a very good example of regenerative science, of ReSci.
So is ReSci the practice of studying things that are good for the earth? Is that a simple way to put it?
I would say no. I think ReSci, and this is it, right? Well, we're going to define these terms, and everyone is going to have a slightly different version of this definition. I think like regeneration would be a better example to what you just defined, John. I'm not sure how I would define ReSci, because now listening to Paige, it kind of does sound like that, and it's kind of made me rethink, because you don't need to have an open science component, essentially, to have regenerative science as per the definition that Paige gave it. But maybe as we go around this circle and we see what other people's definition, we'll go more into that, because it is a space that I'm starting to see catch more trends. And I think it's good for people to really understand what is the nuances between this. And I think these kind of conversations help that. Bruno, I don't know if you want to go next, give us your definition or what you understand ReSci to be.
So first of all, when I first saw the ReSci tag, when you sent it or something, I was surprised. I was like, oh, new one, nice. But like so like the genesis and the way where we started with ReFi is we're talking about decentralized science and regenerative finance. So like by regenerative finance, like how it's implemented today is just basically adding the financial component to regenerative tech. All right. So ReFi is regenerative tech plus finance. Then DeSci is decentralized science. So the way I like to think of DeSci is I like sort of like map DeSci to I like to think in sort of like in the future terms of a utopia when I'm thinking about some of the blockchain technology. So let's do a 20-year projection and say what is the utopia for DeSci. So you have a decentralized science that basically permeates every aspect of our life. So it's not just applied to say gene sequencing, finding new atoms, discovering new chemicals, new biological systems, new life form. So decentralized science has a way of solving different components that affects the way we live. All right. So now the regenerative aspect, we can apply science to that in two ways to the ReFi system. So one at the regenerative end and the other one at the finance end. So for us in the DeSci space, I'll take a wager that we are looking at the regenerative end, where we are applying decentralized systems, centralized science to regenerative tech. So when I think about ReSci, I just think about that. So I look at how do we sort of like create open systems where so you have a farmer. I'm from Africa, so Africa is like one of the most isolated countries in terms of internet and data. So basically you have a farmer in Africa and you have say a scientist somewhere else in the world, say Australia, and you basically want to do sort of like a scientific study in real time on what agro practices is in Africa or something like that. So what decentralized science and ReFi and regenerative tech does is you could basically create components where those sort of like the boots on the ground effect, which is like the farmers, the people in the local community, you're gathering those data or this information in real time. If it's quantitative data, you have sensors, you have tech, you have electronic data interchanges that allows you to generate those data at that one far end of the world. Then on the other end of the world, where the scientists reside, you could basically do those studies, come up with those papers, come up with those new insights, and anybody can do that. So when I think about ReSci, that is what I think about: applying decentralized science principles to regenerative tech to build better regenerative tech to boost the Earth ecosystem, lead to carbon reduction, better quality of human experience and all that. So I don't have a concrete definition, like a one-liner. I just have a mental picture of a utopian and of a utopian system where DeSci actually plays a role in sort of like regenerative tech. So it's not utopia, like it's something that is implementable in about 2 to 3 years. If you have as DeSci begins to mature, the data begin to be open source, the methodologies and all that, and people can contribute. So in about 2 to 3 years, you basically see that from the impact angle, because that's basically where I'm focused. But in terms of the finance aspect, I'll let somebody else do that. I'm no financial expert.
Cool. So this is, before we get to go to maybe a way to or thought after your description or just definition of it is that it sounds like it's shifting science away from an extractive process with native communities or people in communities who are doing data extraction itself, and more into a collaborative process where I might want to do a study somewhere else in the world, and instead of going there and just taking data and knowledge and then profiting off of it, I have to participate in that local community, and the people gathering the data are seen as peers versus profit. That seems like a very interesting aspect of regenerative process.
Yeah, I like it. So we have two examples here. We have regeneration from the actual like material scientific perspective from Paige. We have regeneration in terms of the beneficial that it brings back to communities and those who are doing the actual tech and bringing it forward. And that also translates into the actual materials and fundamental science itself. Gordon, you going to add to it? Let's go.
Yes, we can hear you, I think.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Sorry, the whole thing just froze for a second. Should I go or?
Yeah, go ahead, Gordon, please.
So, hi, I'm Gordon from NewAtlantis. Nice to meet you all. I guess the way I would kind of think of ReSci would really be science-driven economic frameworks that are nature positive. So that you have and that's kind of a general, maybe word salad-y type of definition. But I think sort of at a high level, I would posit that some of the core drivers of the climate and biodiversity challenges that, the world faces today are really a negative externality of a lot of bad economic models. And so to the extent that we can sort of align wealth creation with improvements in, pro-climate, pro-nature processes and outcomes, then you have a system that should economically allow people to pursue their self-interest, which is really the only reliable, plan of action, I think. Is asking people to do the right thing is great until it's inconvenient, and then they're going to do what is good for them. So if you can make it good, their self-interest is something that's in pursuit of a nature positive outcome, then you have a win on your hands. And I think one of the best ways to kind of really determine if nature positive is there's a certain amount of qualitative aspects to that. And maybe that, comes on the sort of, exposure to nature or the aesthetics of it. But there are also clearly metrics that can be developed or derived that can say, are you heading in the right direction or the wrong direction, whether it's temperature or acidity or, biodiversity or whatever it is you happen to be looking at. And I think that we really collectively will, I'm as bad as the news is today, I'm actually super optimistic because I think enough people are saying that things are terrible, and so we need to do something new. And so why not use science to create currencies or economic systems, even if we continue to use existing fiat currencies, develop economic frameworks that are underpinned by sort of nature and a healthy planet versus extractive zero-sum processes. So I think that, because the news is so bad, people are saying, okay, well, this clearly isn't going to work, so let's try something new. So I don't know, maybe that's naive, but I am optimistic.
No, I like it. Yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I agree with you. I don't think it's being too optimistic. And one common theme that I seem to be seeing across the variety of fields, both ReFi, DeSci, and ReSci, is this idea of the tech not only coming into fruition as based on the policies that already exist, right? So either the economic policies or the scientific industry policies, regulations, or the regenerative component, but more so this actually being a bidirectional influence, where this new emerging tech, these new emerging concepts can help us rethink and reshape the policies that exist. And so to Gordon's point, the extractive ethos that we came into this industrial revolution with, thinking that, or not necessarily thinking that, but just being extractive clearly has caused issues, or has its own detriment to that. I still think that we're living in, and humans are, this is how we think, this is how our brain works. Scientists in particular are like this, but it's very hard for us to shift paradigms. And when something new emerges, we often try to fit it within the existing paradigm instead of maybe looking at it as its own object and saying, okay, how can we retailor this such that it's comprehensive and includes the new features that are being put forward by this, right? And this is what I think is fundamentally important to a lot of these sci spaces that are now coming out, sci-fi spaces that are now coming out, is exactly that. It's very much sci-fi, and the old rules don't really apply and they don't fit. And trying to jam that square in that round hole, it's causing issues. Look at DeFi. Look at all the monetary policies. It's an issue, and I think that's fundamentally interesting to this space, and it's very exciting to be kind of at the cutting edge. And all of us, not to toot any horns or anything, but kind of OGs in the space at this point, and we're sitting at the edge, and it's profoundly humbling to understand that how we operate and how we move forward and the precedents that we set is really what's going to inform those policies that eventually come into fruition once people stop trying to ram that square into the hole. But go ahead, John. You want to jump in and say anything?
I was just going to summarize as a third point, which is the economics. The incentive realignment is the main point that Gordon was putting out. And so there's 3 different definitions of ReSci. So I will just fall back to my go-to. We're all still building the same thing that started in 2008, which is open economic networks, where we're trying to realign how people act by using this permissionless currency. So it's really cool, though. It's I'm a huge fan.
Well, I wonder about that, and I'd love to hear it from your guys' perspective, because similar to how we had a conversation to D or not to D, decentralized or not decentralized. Is that necessary for, or what spectrum is that necessary for DeSci to be DeSci? What is, in your guys' opinion, the fundamental component that is needed to push forward this whole ReSci idea? And it's 3 different structures or 3 different categories or definitions that you guys give, but is there a consensus basis layer that we think has to be a part of that for ReSci to achieve what it's looking to achieve? Anybody, please. It's open discussion. Don't put out your hands. Just jump in. Have a conversation.
I think there should be some guardrail, because if it's just too wide ranging, then you're then it's like a cocktail party, and you may not result in any sort of useful output or momentum. So, if people don't know what they're going to get when they show up at a ReSci discussion, it's like, are they going to talk about a particular technology or finance or, some other thing without having some sort of like overarching principle behind it? I think, might be an interesting conversation, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be like a knowledge production process. So I would suggest that ReSci would sort of be best served by having at least the concepts in mind that if you're going to use science and you're going to marry it with economics that are like pro-planetary economics, try to be at least somewhat explicit about how those 3 kind of things link together. And you may not have it all sussed out, but at least be driving in that direction. So just my thought.
Agreed. No, I think that's good. I think we're moving away from part of the future, and the Web3 is a good example of this, right? Is we have these industries that are siloed. So we talk about silos a lot. They're siloed from each other. And I think at the government level, we see there's interplay, but from a society perspective, you don't often think about economic policy and scientific policy together. And that's such a weird thing, because we all are subject to these different paradigms that culminate on us on our day-to-day, but yet they're separate. What if, and this is obviously more complex, so there's also more moving parts, that limitation, but I think moving forward, this merging and comprehensive perspective that accounts for all of these things in one way, if we can ever manage to do it, if our brains can conceptualize that, we might need to leverage AI and all these kind of things, would give us maybe a better foothold into something that is more stable, if done properly, more stable, and has less breaking points or points of failure, because you have these overlapping layers that all kind of feed into each other.
It's not about building. Yeah, it's not about, from my point of view, building something that's less likely to break. It's about building something that breaks more often, and it doesn't matter. So the whole point of blockchain and cryptocurrency is to build thousands of economic solutions to all the problems that exist in the world. It's marrying economics and technology in an open source ethos. So if I can build 1,000 currencies, each with a different value set behind them, and one of them hyperinflates, I can, as a user, just choose to shift to a different currency, and we don't need to go to war and have a new world order and a new Bretton Woods and all these new policies where authorities impose a new global financial system. We have our own, it's called the people's currency, and we can build thousands of them. And all of those are ReSci. It's just, all we're doing is Bitcoin is ReSci. It's DeSci. All these are the same freaking thing. We're just taking value sets and injecting them into a blockchain, which mints a currency. And these happen to be science-based blockchain. Bruno, you're smiling. Go, man.
Yeah. Okay, so I think sort of like my conceptualization is closer to what Jonathan is saying. So I'm thinking in terms of practical application, all right? So we have the way I'm thinking about it, there's two approaches. So there's the approach from the science angle, where you have basically science as the base layer. Then there are different angles to science. So you could apply science to different domains of life. And one of those domains is the regenerative aspect. So that basically means applying scientific methodologies, decentralized manners to solve problems in the refi space. So that is one angle. Then another implementation angle is to look at refi as sort of like as an industry segment and say, what are the components of refi? You have the economic models, you have the tech, you have the operations, you have the in real life assets and all that. Then what is the engine for growth, or what is the engine to push refi to a more sustainable model? So you could have, like traditional systems, you could think about R&D departments and all that. So instead of having R&D department, you basically have DeSci. It sort of like ties into refi as an engine of growth to drive refi forward. So it's just basically the way two systems interact, because like at the end of the day, everything we are building is basically to sort of like improve sort of like collaboration between people to drive the global economy forward, to push the limitation of the human experience to a more sustainable future. So DeSci has a role to play where in collaboration with refi can serve as an engine of growth to tilt refi towards like a productive sustainable growth in the future. Refi also has a place on the DeFi because it could sort of serve as an industry segment for those in the DeFi to go into research into those areas to build those systems. So it's just symbiotic growth.
I like that. Symbiotic growth.
I want to add to that, but I'd love to hear Paige. Paige, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well,
sure, but my comment may be a little bit tangential, so perhaps you should go first.
Okay, so I'll just say, because it popped into my mind, and Bruno, I love the way that you frame it. It's actually a three-part, and we often leave out DeFi. I think DeFi is like one of the pieces of the puzzle that we often leave out in DeSci conversations because we're like, that's those guys, it's degens and whatever. But from the perspective of monetary policy, Bruno, I would just add to your equation that so DeFi will fuel, to a certain extent, DeSci, or the ability for DeSci to be substantial. So that's its engine to an extent. And then that will come into regenerative finance and create. So ReSci is almost like the ultimate form of these three Lego blocks compiling onto each other. And as more and more pieces of Web3 come into fruition, DeSoc and whatever the other ones you want to call about, and we mash them, we place them together, we'll get new themes. It's like a ever progressing Voltron in like different ways, right? Or power. I like Power Rangers when I was young. So, different Megazords Zords forming together to make different forms of Megazords. So that's how I see. That's great. That's a very beautiful way of putting it. Thanks for that, Bruno. Paige, let's get to the tangent.
Well, this is actually kind of circling back to Bruno's first point about incorporating, data, like not seeing people as data points, but as seeing people as active collaborators. And I've been participating a lot with this, with UNESCO's Open Science Initiative and their working groups and stuff. And there was a presentation the other day from somebody who was presenting about their open science project, and the point was made that we often see open science, and I think we do this in DeSci as well, that this research then needs to be made, open and public and open sourced and accessible, and that's true. But what this presenter was also so adamant about saying was exactly what Bruno. The actual process of the science and the research needs to be open. That it's not just researchers saying this is that we want, but the actual sourcing of the process also needs to be, open and collaborative, and bringing in a lot more, input in order to define what direction the research actually should go into, what direction it should go in. Not necessarily making everything a democratic vote. That would probably lead to stasis as well. But still, just making it, back to Bruno's point, just making it really open and allowing for that input. And I also have to say that's probably too why I've been shying away from incorporating a lot of the discussion about finance into conversations I've been having, is that a lot of people outside of our world, I think they get very shy and skeptical and almost afraid when you bring in the subject of finance or tokens to science. Sometimes I can almost see a physical closing off. And so that's why I think maybe subliminally I've begun to sort of train myself to not talk too much about the finance aspect of it, but it is very promising. I mean, I'm not a finance person, but I do recognize the potential. Anyway, that's all. Those were some thoughts.
No, those are great points. John, go ahead.
Just the last point. It's funny when people shy away from the money talk around science, and I see the same thing. But then you ask them, oh, how much of your time do you spend getting money to do science? They're like, oh, like 70%. Oh man, let's make that better.
Yeah, I mean, I just know we work a lot in marine biology, and you have a lot of people who are extremely talented, but they have to spend 50% of their time trying to get grants that are $100,000, which, not that that's not a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money, at the end of the day, to really move the needle forward, or to move the ball forward. I think that I hear what you're saying about people sort of for a lot of like the bloom come off the rose of crypto, but it doesn't have to be tokens per se. But I do think trying to build economically viable models for pursuing science is I think that's a message that really needs to be put out there.
Yeah.
And I feel like people in the academic world in particular are very focused on paper citations, but that's a little bit of a false god in some way, in that you've got fields where you've got 5 tenure positions opening per year and hundreds to thousands of people trying to get them. So, and to Bruno's point, you've got entire swaths of the world that are not as equally, they can't equally access a lot of those sort of pipelines and connections and things like that to do it. And so I think that if we don't find ways to start making the science more economically viable, we are going to, particularly with stuff like AI too, right? Where it's you're, a lot of people want to try to and I don't know kind of where I fall out on this, but it's like, there's big pushes to regulate it. And then there's also the open source movement. It's like, if you regulate it, what you're basically doing is saying all the insiders get to make the decisions at that point, just because it's a practical matter. Like, the only people that can navigate that are the people who have the wherewithal, capital, and understanding of how to sort of deal with the legal on that. And I think that, we have a bit of an all hands on deck situation with regard to climate and biodiversity at the moment, and mistakes will be made, but and I totally understand the precautionary principle, particularly around synthetic biology. It could get, haywire. But I also think we want to be really leaning into processes are out there, and if we don't create methods for science to self-perpetuate, but to always have to go back to these like very long grant funding cycles, like I think we've seen that doesn't scale fast enough. Like, the traditional NGO science, open science, I mean, it just, it's like, it's produced some great stuff, but it's like, these are sort of linear solutions to what are increasingly exponential, problems. And so at some point we have to figure out how to align private capital and make science, like more regenerative science, more directly investable, in my opinion.
So, Gordon, I would even argue it's not about aligning private capital. It's about aligning currency generation from the get-go. So I think there's a lot that the ReSci movement can learn from the computer over data movement that's particularly aligned with crypto, because computer over data is a very measurable thing, and there are multiple incentive structures trying to print currency to reward distributed computing and building entire science ecosystems off of it, entire nations with economies. And I know at the summit in May in Boston, May 9th and 10th, there's going to be at least 3 talks talking about building economic models from the ground up using scientific distributed computing. So there's a lot there. I love it. And I think we got to focus on the currency generation, not so much private enterprise.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that, because unfortunately, like, I'd love to attend that, and we're very focused on having an economic underpinning to sort of create a self-perpetuating model here. So it would be great to kind of compare notes with other projects that are out there. But yeah, and I'm a pro crypto person, but like, I get that people, they conflate SBF with crypto, which is, I don't think, a fair, comparison in some ways, but that's a separate discussion. And in one sense, like, I think I agree with you. I think particularly on the computer over data stuff, it's like, it's going to be a lot more likely that machine.
Oh no. The AI is taking Gordon. He has said too much.
I know. Getting too close. Skynet came in. Nope. Okay. Well, while we let Gordon hopefully battle the Terminators and come back.
Yeah. There he is. Now he's here.
It's just like, I guess, like the AI was like, no, you're done. It just like kicked me out. But what I was going to say is, like, I definitely think that, the likelihood that like a token-based economy is, particularly as we move into these worlds of like DAO to DAO and really AI type transactions, like, they really going to like go through the USD payment rails? Like, maybe not, so anyway, that's a long way of saying, like, I agree with you on the currency piece of it, but I am, and I hope that it trends towards crypto, because I think that's probably the best way to have some programmable money here. But even if you're saying like, oh, it's got to be USD or Euro or, you choose, like, I still think you have to have sustainable, and viable business models that are attached to it, because otherwise, like, you're just back on the sort of the hamster wheel of like trying to get funding grants.
Yep, they are. I'll send you some papers.
So John, since you brought this up, are the flows of money or the generation of revenue different across the 3 fields? or can they be the same? So is it the same structure that would be needed to support DeSci as it would DeFi and ReFi, and then the amalgamation of the three?
I think I understand your question, and my answer would be yes. All these names are eventually going to form the Voltron you've talked about, and this is not the first time I've heard that metaphor. Don't take too much credit.
That was me. It's okay.
All the names will be gone, and we'll just call it what it is, which is money. And then so the flows are the same. You create a currency, and you give it to people who are doing something that is a public good. So in Bitcoin, it's for securing a ledger. In distributed computing, is for providing a computer cycle. In ReSci, it could be for cataloging of plants or measuring acidity or providing like a sensor reading somewhere around the world, air pollution, stuff like that. And every time you do that and it's proven to be accurate, you get money that's generated from the protocol. And then the business model on top of that is a business can buy that data, and in doing so, they inject external currency into that model. And you can build the blockchain in such a way, which is how blockchains work, where in order to interact with that data, you have to use the native currency of that economic system. So you have to use, let's say, ReSci coin. If you want to access pollution data from my phone, you have to pay me in ReSci coin. And if ReSci coin is also the coin I get rewarded with from the protocol when I submit my claim of pollution data to the blockchain, then you have a viable, sustainable economic model. It's exactly how the US dollar works, right? You have to pay taxes in US dollars. I get paid in US dollars. The dollar is generated to create this thing called debt, which is a magical piece of dynamite that always will eventually blow up. And instead of creating debt, we create like useful stuff. We create data, climate pollution readings, acidity readings, computation cycles, stuff like that. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's really cool.
Jonathan.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, if you had replaced the pay for the data in ReSci coin to pay for the data in climecheck token, you basically did sort of like explained our entire economic model. Like I totally agree with what you said. So the traditional Web3, because now Web3 is becoming traditional. So we're like 10 years in.
So first, I love that. Okay.
So the traditional Web3 system is will basically sort of like start a project, create a token, then based on adoption of the project, then you sort of like you have the token has value. But as we sort of like mature into the Web3 systems, like you actually have to realize that everything is a business model. And Jonathan, perfect example with the United States government and every other government in the world, everything is a business model. That is why you always have a balance of trade. So if you're going to build systems, if we're going to build sustainable systems, DeFi, ReFi, ReSci, and every other size that we might come up along the way, like we have to think about building sustainable business processes. So the output from the community sort of like generates inputs that get fed back to generate output. So it's basically a complete system that loops sort of like into itself. So then you have to consider what your token design function is. So your inflation rate is either manageable and you don't create a lot of sort of like FOMO and your token doesn't get overvalued. But the most important thing is, and that is the only thing that makes DeSci work, unfortunately, is if as a DeSci community, we actually produce value. So DeSci only works when value is generated. So it's not like DeFi where you could abstract numbers, you could sort of like forecast, bet on your forecast and all that. So if you do that with DeSci, it will fail because it only works when you generate value. So if you're basically a marine DAO, so how much value are you adding to the marine ecosystem? If you're basically a climate solution, how much of the climate data are you capturing? How much of the awareness are you generating? So like, and because it's open sourced for the most part, so you're not just open sourcing your code where we actually see how it works, you're also open sourcing your deliverables, because DeSci is public facing, ReFi is public facing. So part of the parameters you also have to put out there is how well you're performing on the indexes that you said you're gonna produce. So like it's pretty interesting. So we just basically have to think of designing models that are sort of like a continuous loop that powers the DeSci ecosystem to power the refi ecosystem and to power the general reality.
No, I think that I'm in full agreement. I think there's a lot of nuance in it, in how it works, and the really cool part to me about crypto and all this technological revolution is we get to change what the outcome of a business model is. So instead of it just being profit, we can say stable financial infrastructure is the outcome of the business model, because that benefits people. It's not necessarily making money is the good thing. The financial stability is the good thing. And that's DeFi, and that's very valuable. Stable financial systems are critical for society, but it's not really seen as valuable by a lot of people. When you bring in DeSci and you're like, oh, the outcome of the business model is science, and science makes everyone's life better. It increases the standard of living of everyone at the same time. So people get that. And like when you bring in ReSci, it's the same thing. Oh, it's science with sort of a regenerative twist on it, where the outcome of our business model is not profit for the founder. It's good science. It's replicable science. It's trust in science. It's the data that is used in the scientific process. It's a different type of business model, but I completely agree with you that everything is business at its core.
You know, it's such a culture shock, right? It's such a different cultural paradigm to what we're used to. Because if you think about it, like off the riff, people will comment and say like, well, what's the incentive of a participant to build such a system if they're not going to reap direct rewards from it, right?
I don't want to get measles. That's my incentive. I don't want to get measles. I want people to trust vaccines again.
Yeah. But some people don't care. Like some people are like, you know, he's not gonna get me. So it's an interesting balancing act, is my point. I think it's an interesting balancing act and we have clearly we have an uphill struggle, right? Because it's like almost completely 180 from the paradigm that exists within itself now. So before we wrap this up, one of the things I'd love to hear from everybody here is, what do you think? And because we ended off on value, which was a really good point, how do you think, what is your opinion on terms of how do we drive that perception of value in the thing we're trying to get to, whether it be conservation of marine biology spaces, biodiversity, nuclear fusion, planetary thing? Like obviously it's there, because if it fails, then we haven't conquered space yet. So, you know, but in terms of other things that are maybe a little bit more subtle, less overt, and especially where the funds are not located. So an example of the African continent, right? There are some places in the African continent where like farming is essential, right? But nobody's going to come and dump massive amounts of funding into farming because it doesn't address the needs of whoever it is, right? It's not in the global north. The global north, that's where the concentration of money is. So how do we create it in such a way? How do we create value, or the perception of value, in such a way that it allows these things to move forward and allows us to build?
Is somebody speaking?
Blocks?
I think we just lost Gordon again.
Okay. So I was like, did I just talk for no
reason? No.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
Okay, I'll sum up Jelani's question really quick. How do we produce the perception of value in the things we're building? So we're just going to go around here, Paige, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah.
Keep getting the hot spot, the hot seat. No, just kidding. No, this has been a great, really valuable conversation. I'm my brain is just going a mile a minute. The only way I can answer this question, and hopefully I am answering it in the way that you intend it to be answered, is energy justice. Like that's really the fundamental value. I think if in the global, a lot of us have not experienced what it is to live without electricity. But if you have ever, well, Jelani, I think you just went through an ice storm. So I think this is probably quite relevant for you. And then anybody who's lived through a typhoon or, or a hurricane or anything like that, like if you've ever had to live without electricity for any length of time, then energy justice really is something that you understand. And so that's not that's not an end profit, but it's definitely a huge value. And I don't know if I've answered your question at all. Maybe I just answered something randomly, but that is our fundamental message is energy justice is a human right. It's a human right.
My question is, how do you make it, or how do you help drive that understanding that there's value there? So for people who may not inherently value that, how do you try to petition them to understand that there's value there? That's my question.
You know, I have to say that I think we're still masterminding that. So I'm open to suggestions. You know, I did a lot. I've been undertaking a lot of workshopping and education on this subject, and it is a bit of a heavy lift. I have to say, it is a heavy lift because a lot of who you're messaging in order to buy in to this are people who have really maybe no personal experience with what it is to live without electricity. So yeah, you know, I don't know, maybe you just gave me an idea. Maybe we should put together like month-long vacations where people have to go somewhere and live absolutely without electricity, no hot showers, no phone recharges, and then maybe after the month have them come back and sit down and say, what do you think? Do you think energy is a basic human right or no? I don't know.
I would be surprised if a lot of people with vast amounts of money would be like, yeah, I'm just going to throw away all my shit. So, I'm gonna throw away all my things to just go experience this. But I agree with you. It's definitely, this is an open-ended question. There's no answer to this, and why I want it to be, well, if there is one, good. But why I'm okay with this is that hopefully people watching this will spark them to think about these initiatives, because I think this is the biggest issue that we're going to face moving forward. Once we create all these hopefully stable monetary policies, it's how do we get people to engage with them? How do we actually drive the transactions, the utility within those systems for that cause? And that this is the message. This is what we have to tackle.
Hey, so, go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Gordon.
I was going to say, I think that we have to get past the vibe checks in terms of like getting people to pay for stuff, and really like try to land some of these things in specifics around like what is the economic value of what's being generated here. And, in the case of climate and energy is a tough one, right? Because I mean, although there is a price per kilowatt hour of like different projects that are, or different types of energy generation, like it does sort of assume, a grid that you're somehow metering back on that end. In the case of like biodiversity, like we feel pretty strongly that if you look at the ecosystem's services values that are produced, like whether that in marine cases, that could be, output of the amount of fish that are in a fishery. It could also be the, resiliency of a coastal ecosystem, or it could be the amount of carbon that's getting sequestered in, marine seagrass or mangroves or whatever blue carbon initiative or area that is. But those are very like tangible, like monetizable things. If you have an open metric that people can see, and I agree with Paige, it's got to all be open, and I think Bruno was making this point too, open and transparent, so that people can see like, okay, how are you arriving at whatever your metric is saying is the value for this particular area? What is the methodology and how can it be improved? And once you have that, particularly in the case of ecosystem services, you can say, okay, well, if we know this ecosystem is going to produce X amount of fresh water or Y amount of tuna or whatever it is, that has a price. There's also like, to kind of marry biodiversity kind of back to the pharma world as well too, we're at the very front end of like, what's kind of broadly called environmental DNA, as kind of a catch-all term. But, in the case of the oceans alone, for example, less than 2% of marine species have been sequenced. So if you think about where like natural products and sort of genomically derived or genetically derived products or pharma or synbio is likely to spring from. It's going to probably come from gene clusters that are discovered and then sort of either harnessed or augmented in some meaningful way. And again, that also has like specific economic value. And McKinsey, put a price tag of around between $3 to $4 trillion for the bioeconomy within the next 10 years. The World Economic Forum, say what you will about them and whatever opinions people have about them or not, like they published a bunch of research where they estimate that somewhere around $44 trillion a year of economic activity is moderately to heavily dependent on functioning ecosystems and natural systems. So, these are huge markets. And we like if we want to be taken seriously, we have to be able to go to governments and go to corporations and say, your supply chain is in peril, and here's the risk model around it, or here's the methodology for helping to shore up this so that you're going to have the output, even in the face of climate change and sort of changing ecosystems. And I think once we get some early proof points in that, I think it will start to scale very rapidly. I mean, there's huge amounts of capital that's like trying to get deployed in ways that can move the needle, right? And we got a lot of stuff getting pushed through renewable energy, but that's only like a piece of the problem. And so like I really want to just, and I'm sorry I'm not going to be in Boston because I would love to to meet the people to talk about it, but it's like I really want to push the DeSci community to say, hey, look, we're not working on this is not like hobbies, right? Like this is about like trying to like figure out how do we harness like science to create better economic systems, in my opinion. And the reason to be excited about that is that it's like a huge fucking opportunity as well as the right thing to do karmically, So it's just like, sorry, I didn't mean to like,
No, you're good. This is great. So go to Bruno now, but to sum up the 2 points really quick. So Paige, your perspective was about educate people to the value of it. Gordon, you're talking about prove economic efficiencies here. You're saving money by doing this new stuff. Bruno,
or making money.
Yeah, sir.
Okay, so I think one of the benefits of coming from Nigeria or Africa particularly is I think you begin to realize that value means something different to somebody else. So I think in designing better systems, we have to realize that value is like an umbrella term. And if you're basically doing sort of like a Web3 based system where you have participants to an infrastructure provides sort of like a base service to other different type of clients, you basically have to understand that. So let's call it the value chain. So on the product value chain, at different aspects of different ends of the value chain or different nodes, you have different value points. So like the guy in the rural aspect of Nigeria, what he values, if you look at sort of like the Maslow's law of hierarchy at this point in time, is basically sustenance and covering. All right. So what sort of like some of the expressions about the environment, like me or anybody that gives climate solution, is what we value is being able to understand how do we drive that needle forward. So you have to be able to satisfy one value to extract a value that you can transmute to another value. So basically, being able to communicate value, being able to convert value. So think about Uniswap. So you're basically swapping one value. So the value is a token one, another value token two. So you're just basically swapping values. So I think we had to think about that deeply when building and when sort of like thinking through climecheck, is because like our initial customers, the people we've spoken to, are people from Africa, and right now they just want to eat. They want sort of like a stable supply of power, like Paige said, and sometimes you have to pay to get that. So, and we were saying, like, we have like a lot of untapped data in this region. how do we get those data? So we're saying, okay, one of the values you want to consider is sort of like a physical a monetary system that allows you to transact. One thing we see as value is the data we can glean about the pollution level in this particular area by you contributing nodes to the ecosystem. So we're saying, okay, on the ClimeCheck sensor, contribute value by generating that data that we need. Then we are going to give you value, which is ClimeCheck token, which you can swap for currency and use to solve like your immediate needs. Now, ClimeCheck has a couple of data stored sort of in the network. We know data is value. AI systems did them. So you could basically leverage those data. For a researcher out there, the value is being able to tap into vast ecosystem of data sets and generate reports that are reproducible and actually indicative of what's happening. So that's like sort of like a value transmutation. Then you have farmers that want to do analysis on the data to help their farm. That's value transfer. So being able to communicate, understanding the different nodes in the ecosystem and communicate that value, and also understand one important aspect of that value based on the monetary system we'll run now is being able to tie it back to the fiat system where it sort of like regenerates the ecosystem. So that goes back to the business model conversation we had earlier. So sort of like the principle is like, I think it's Newton's first law, like energy is not destroyed, but can transform from one form to the other. So the same thing in the ecosystem. So you don't destroy value, you just basically have different forms through which value morph. So founders, building DeSci systems, those building ReSci systems, like being able to understand that value map, because it's more important for us because we are producing things that directly tie into the public. And sometimes there is no, yes, money is good, but money is not universal value for everybody. So you have to be able to communicate values based on the sort of like the stakeholder segment and translate that value to other aspects of the system.
I love these podcasts because it's always just like great discussions from people with great ideas. Communicating perfect. So to sum it up, I got nothing to add, and we're going to wrap up here shortly. I'm just going to sum up what you all said on how to communicate value, how to get value perceived about these projects and what we're building. Paige, you hit on the education. Talk to people about your project. Tell them why, like the reality of why what you're building is valuable. Convince them, make an argument. Gordon, you were talking about the economics efficiency. You can make money with this stuff. You can save money from this. You can protect your supply chain. It's a risk management solution. Like these big entities in particular, they don't innovate, they risk manage. So they're not going to build the new solutions. If you can present them a solution that offers lower risk than what they currently use, they will use your solution. And Bruno, you were talking about empathy. Act with extreme empathy. One person you talk to is going to have a different value set than another person you're going to talk to, and trying to convince them that what you think is valuable is kind of like a lost cause. You're wasting your words. Figure out what they think is valuable and see if you can contribute to it. Listen to people more than you talk to them about something. It's just, there's so much. That's a wealth of knowledge you guys just offered. Thank you.
I love it. This is a we have so many clips that we're going to be generating out of this because it's such great value, and I think essential conversations that need to be had for projects that are building within this space in particular that involves the other parties or input from those communities, your endpoint users in that. This is a beautiful point to end on. So I don't have anything to add on that. I think that was fantastic. This was a great conversation. I'd like to thank you, Paige, Bruno, and Gordon for coming on and sharing your expertise and your insights. I think this has been profound. Thank you for your time. John, obviously, thank you for doing the back end
stuff. I got you, brother.
Yeah. One person who we always forget to shout out is Talisa. Talisa, thank you for helping us with the promo and the visualization. This is a great team effort. If you guys, this is an open platform for all of us to discuss about DeSci. So if there are topics that you'd like to submit that you want to talk about again, or not again, but talk about in the future, John has already noted down a few. This is open for all. So we want to just encourage these kind of conversations within the space. Exactly to Gordon's point, being able to kind of come together and eventually maybe have this just DeSci retreat where we can all mash heads and come up with the resolution of pieces that I think have been overlooked and that are essential to pushing the cause forward. But this is just one piece that is hoping to until we get there, till we reach the summit of the peaks. So that being said, guys, thank you again. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you all the listeners for chiming in, and we'll see you in a couple weeks for our 4th episode, which will be another exciting and stimulating conversation. John, you want to end off with saying anything?
No, just thank you everyone for coming and talking. That was great.
Awesome. Guys, please follow Paige. Check in on FrontierDAO, Gordon at NewAtlantis, Bruno here at ClimeCheck. Fantastic projects, very much qualified participants pushing them forward. We need the community to chime in and help us build what we're trying to build for the community. So please check them out, follow them on all their socials. We'll link them and add them to this final stream afterwards. And yeah, that's it. Take it easy, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Jelani. Thanks, John. Thanks, Gordon. Thanks,
Pleasure.
Bruno.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah, John, I would love, I definitely love to connect on the